All right. It is 6 o'clock, so I want to welcome everyone to the Maury County Board of Education Budget Committee meeting of Monday, December 19th, 2016. First item, we do need to take the row. I am present. Mr. Dudley, Ms. Parker, Mr. Moore, Ms. Powers, and Mr. Pennings. All right, so it looks like we do have 4 members of the committee present, so we do have a quorum, so we can go and get started. Let the minutes also reflect that Ms. Kinzer, Mr. Beaver, Ms. Morency, and Mr. Atkinson are also present today. All right, first item of business, we need everyone received a proposed agenda. We need to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to approve? All right, motion by Mr. Dudley, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then, as you all noticed on the previous regular agenda, we do have our planning horizons coming up. This is just to keep these things front of mind so that we know that we've got some things to get accomplished, so we know that there's a certain time frame for getting those things accomplished. So that's just to remind us. Next, we're going to move on. We do have a section in the agenda for public input, and so at this time, I would ask if anyone who is a Maury County citizen wants to provide any public input to the committee, they can do so now if they want to come forward.
Because it's chilly.
It is a little chilly. Thank you.
Thank you for the
Mr.
opportunity. My questions are, I guess, threefold. How we got to this point. Secondly, why it took so long, because the payroll problems have been building. And third, and I hope you've been aware of this, but most of our teachers' deductions for Maury County Education Association come through central office. We as of yet, even though we've now given those to Mr. Parliament, we as of yet to receive a check for those. That's really unprecedented. And so we're operating in a negative in our budget, and it's a lot of money they take out every paycheck. And we like the fact that that happens, but we haven't seen it. So I hope that's part of the report tonight, that that'll be accounted for.
Thank you, Mr. Huebner. And just we're going to get a little bit more detailed information. Are you saying this is for this particular month of December, or
started with the October 15th paycheck? That's when dues come out. October 31st got skipped except for a couple $100. We don't know what happened there. So we had met with the director of finance at that time, and what we agreed to is they would extend it. They go through May, and they extended it to June 15th. We said, okay, that's at least it'll be done. And then November 15th was taken out, the end of the month. We're not sure about 15th and 16th, because mine comes out of my bank, so I don't know what other people got. But you're looking at, what is that, 5 or 6, maybe 6, and it amounts to somewhere, several $1,000s each paycheck.
Okay.
And so
is your understanding, I guess, it's been withheld out of the check.
It's being withheld, yes.
You're saying that the district needs to get you
right,
all a
because
check.
That happens. It's been many years since we started this in the early days, and we get that check really quickly and promptly, and people have done Amanda and others have done a typically good job with that. I don't see her, but oh, there you are, right there. Okay, and have gotten that too, but for some reason it hasn't happened this time. So
okay, well, I appreciate you bringing that to the committee's attention. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
Okay, anyone else? Any citizens of Maury County that would like to address the committee at this time? All right, if not, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section of our agenda. We're going to talk about payroll, and first item is the introduction of our interim CFO. I'm sure you wish it was under better circumstances that we were making your introduction, but if you'll just state your name and tell the committee a little bit about you, maybe go through kind of what your educational history is, what your experience has been since your education, and who you work for at the present time, and kind of what you do for them.
Okay. My name is Eric Parliament. I went to school here at David Lipscomb, graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. Over the last 25 to 30 years, I've worked in many different industries, from everything from a CFO, controller, accounting manager, manufacturing, banking, service industry, pretty much all industries across the board. I started working for Vaco about 8 years ago. That's a company out of Nashville. They have offices across the country, but they're a rather large company and they have a lot of different arms. But the arm that I work for is a consulting piece, and there are about 15 full-time consultants in the Nashville area that do what I do. And we basically go into companies for a number of reasons. It could be to provide interim services. It could be to help companies maneuver through bankruptcy. It could be to come into situations like this. So it's a variety of different things that we work on, projects that we work on.
Thank you, Mr. Parliament. It is good to officially meet you. And so I think as far as your experience, how many years' experience do you have in accounting?
I have almost 30 years of experience in accounting.
Okay. And so you've been with the company Vaco for approximately 8 years, and you're a consultant. I
Yes,
guess in
sir.
some ways, almost companies will hire you almost like a hired gun. You come into other workplaces and help them with their
Correct.
payroll and accounting type things.
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Parliament, we're going to get into some substantive questions in a moment, but I guess to be fair to you at the outset, you've been on the job for roughly 2 weeks now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you've had a short tenure here at Maury County Schools, but let's talk a little bit about kind of the current situation that we have at the present moment, and something that is concerning to board members and the committee. We certainly cherish our employees, and we want to make sure our employees are paid for the hard work that they do in the school system. And I know that there were some issues maybe with this particular last pay row period in December as far as employees getting their checks. And I know there's some confusion about when they were going to get their payroll. I guess the first thing that as a committee we would like to know is everyone now, our employees of Maury County School System, has everybody been paid now?
Yes, sir, they have.
Okay. Now, I understand, Mr. Parliament, that you all have set up kind of a system where employees can report if they're still having some issues with the amounts that they're getting paid or the withholdings and that sort of thing, if they've got questions about the particular amounts. And so you all have set up that system, but is it a Google type platform or something like that?
Right, there's a link to a form to fill out that drops into a Google Docs form.
Okay, so has the superintendent and his office been encouraging employees when they get their check, if they've got some questions or if they believe that there's an error, to report that through that system?
That's correct.
Okay. And so has your office, since getting the employees that are reporting that, have you all been working to go through that to see if somebody is having some questions to be able to try to clear those things up?
Yes, once we got confirmation that everybody got paid last week, starting Friday morning, we started working our way through that form. There's approximately 200 to 250 employees that were affected. Well over half of those were more questions about new benefits that started in December for next year, and a lot of just questions, not necessarily my payroll is wrong. So the actual number of that 2 to 250 is much smaller of employees basically reporting that their paycheck is wrong. Now, what you have to understand is just because they're reporting that their paycheck is wrong, what they're actually doing is saying it's different from what it should have been. And we're going through that process of explaining to them on a one-to-one basis how we've recalculated that based upon previous errors and how that paycheck is correct.
Okay. So just to put things in perspective and have context, I guess the total number of employees that we're talking about in payroll is roughly, is it 1,500? Is that roughly?
1,500 to 1,600,
Okay.
yes.
And so we've had approximately 2 to 250 employees that have went through the Google Docs system to report that they've got some questions or they believe that there may be some errors with their particular payment that they just received.
That's correct.
Okay. And I guess some of it, though, could actually be larger, and we're going to get into that in a moment, could extend even back into the summer. There, on that particular 2 to 250 could be other things that are
Correct.
working through.
And these are not issues about the 12-15 payroll. A lot of these are issues that are going back to July, August, September, and that time frame as far as discrepancies that they have seen in their paycheck.
Okay. So going back to this particular list, roughly, I guess some employees, when they're filling these out, could it be that when they're looking at their pay stub, they just may be thinking that maybe there's something wrong, but maybe it's just a misunderstanding, or there just needs to be some communication to explain this is why this amount is this amount, that sort of thing? Are there some of those on the list?
That's the majority of them. After we worked very hard the first 8 days or so prior to this payroll to get that payroll as correct as we could. The goal was to get it 100% correct. We got it as correct as we could. So a lot of the issues on that Google Docs form are people just questioning how we got to the amount that they got to.
But you all are still looking at those too, to go back
Absolutely.
to see, is it correct or not correct, that sort of thing?
Absolutely.
And as far as your office is going, in order to make the determination, is it correct or not, are you all just relying upon just your current data for this particular payroll system, or are you all going back in time to try to figure out, okay, exactly, this particular employee is supposed to be paid this particular salary, this is their certain benefits, that sort of thing?
Right. With this payroll system, there's actually two pieces to it. There's an HR side and there's a payroll side. We're going back to the HR side to pull, which their information, I believe, comes from employee contracts and things like that. So that was our jumping off point to then do the payroll side of this. So,
Okay, so you all are going back to the source to make
Yes, we are.
sure that you are relying upon good
Yes.
information as to
Yes.
what's supposed to be correct. And then, so again, going back, so you would say the majority of what you're finding so far is, it may be just people that are maybe studying their paycheck for the first time and may, thinking it's incorrect, but it may be, just with some explanation, it is the correct amount.
correct.
And some of the misunderstandings, Ms. Hargrove, you may be able to touch on this, but I guess maybe there were some benefit amount changes, I guess, that may have happened, and maybe people are kind of seeing that for the first time or studying it for the first time, that those benefits are changed, or the withholdings.
Right, we had an increase in the amount, the premium amount for health insurance, and then, of course, all of those go into effect in January. We start taking those premiums out with the December 15th check. So a lot of folks are calling, why did my benefits increase? Why did the amount I was paying for the premium increase? And we're explaining those. But that hit as well as everything else with this payroll period.
So that was something that was naturally going to change.
Yes.
But I guess with the issues that we had, it's got people kind of, I guess, focusing on that and studying that, and rightfully, everybody wants to know exactly what's it supposed to be. But, so some of that you all are working through, explaining what is supposed to be the correct amount. But then there's also some that you all are still, and I guess this goes back to what we're going to get into in a moment, going back kind of the root of where maybe there was some confusion back during the summer. There's still some people that are reporting that are having a need for some adjustments as far as what their payment amount should be or what their withholding should be.
That's correct. And we got probably 90 to 95% through those adjustments for this past payroll.
Okay.
So that was our goal, was to get most people adjusted to the right amount on that payroll.
All right. So basically, you're looking at the big list. It looks like roughly a majority of them are just need to explain some things that are
Correct.
actually correct. And then you all are going through the other things and seeing if it's incorrect, what needs to be done to correct that. And
That's
y'all have been
correct.
working through that list.
Yes.
And did you all, have y'all been working on that since Thursday?
As soon as the payroll we knew was gone, then we started working that list. So that was probably Friday morning is when we started working that list.
Okay. And you, and the employees, have they been put in some overtime
Yes,
to get?
quite a bit.
Okay. Okay, so you all are diligently going through that list, and that's still a process that is taking place presently.
That is correct.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the larger issue. I mean, we've had this particular mix up with this particular last payroll, and you all are getting that corrected. Have you? I do want to be fair to you, Mr. Parliament. You've only been on the job for 2 weeks, and there's probably only so much, anybody can humanly do in 2 weeks. But have you been there long enough where you feel like you've got your arms wrapped around what is happening with the payroll system in order to be able to get that fixed?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that a lot of these problems go back prior to the conversion to Skyward, but we're looking at a July 1 conversion to Skyward. And the majority of the mistakes that we have found early on were from poor setup caused by a lack of training. And it wasn't from training being provided as much as taken advantage of. So once those mistakes started happening, employees started calling about issues. Those were either band-aided or corrected incorrectly. So as you moved through the year and got deeper into the year, that kind of became a snowball effect to get us where we are right now.
Okay, so I know you're not a physician, but I mean, in some ways, your diagnosis so far is this, as far as a larger issue, there were some issues back during the summer whenever we transitioned from one particular payroll software into another payroll software.
Correct.
Okay. And I guess it's like anybody else. That's probably a difficult thing for even the most seasoned payroll person or the most seasoned accountant to try to switch from one system to another.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And when you're dealing with payroll, when you're doing it mid-year, that makes it even more difficult.
Okay. But I guess, so are you diagnosing, though, that I guess were we up at that particular time, I mean, from looking at things, did we have the skill and the experience level to be able to do that smoothly, or were there some issues? I think you maybe mentioned training.
I believe that the skill set at that time was not what was needed to make this a successful transition.
And it's like anything else. I mean, we're all good at certain things, and probably even like myself, if you brought me into your office, I'd probably be just mumbling everything up. So I probably wouldn't be good at that. So we all have different skill sets, I guess.
Yes.
But so did you, from your analysis so far, did you notice that there were really any issues with the new software system that we've gone to?
Not any issues that, had the training been taken advantage of, I guess, shortly after conversion, it would have been solved fairly easily.
Okay. So as far as the software itself, you feel confident that it's a decent, or it's a good, viable software to
Yes.
use?
I had no prior experience, but in the 2 weeks that I've been here, there are many school systems in Tennessee that use that software and use it successfully. So I don't believe there's an issue with the software at all.
Okay, so you don't really have a dog in the fight. It's not like you came from a preference for one system or another.
No.
You've been using the system the last 2 weeks, and you haven't noticed any problems with the particular
No.
computer system.
And payroll is a little bit more precise, so you have to use the system as it's intended to use, or you're not going to get the right results. So
Okay.
that's where the training is very key.
Right. Well, and probably from a kitchen table standpoint, at the end of the day, we probably don't, many of us, even the board members, care much about getting too much into the weeds.
Right.
What we are wanting to know is, do you have the know-how, and do you have your arms wrapped around this to be able to fix it?
I believe the people that we've had in place up to this point have done a tremendous job in identifying what has happened. We have a game plan in place to correct what has happened moving forward.
Okay. And you are in that process right now,
That's
I guess.
correct.
And I guess we're working on it today.
As we speak, they're still up there working.
Okay, there's still employees
Yes.
working there at central office. Okay.
Yes.
And so you feel that there's a light at the end of the tunnel for us?
Absolutely.
We
yeah.
just got to, and maybe explain a little bit about the process that you're doing right now. So you're going all the way back into whenever this transition point took place and verifying what should have been the correct information for every employee.
Right now, we're working, we're going to finish working that list of employees that have notified us that they think something's wrong and to explain those differences. Once we get done with that, we're going to do a complete audit of the payroll system, every employee, and go back basically and do what should have been done July 1st. And look at every employee and make sure that that setup is correct.
So you're going to look, make sure it's set up the way it's supposed to be set up, and then go forward and see if there's if they were underpaid in any amount or overpaid in any amount to get that corrected.
That's correct.
Okay.
And we'll accomplish that. And a lot of those people may not have put anything on that Google Doc, so we may uncover some more of that down the road.
So you all are not limiting yourselves to just, from a larger issue, just the employees that are reporting specific problems. You all are going to go back to the very beginning point and correct it going forward.
I think with what we saw happen last week, we felt it was necessary to go back and look at every employee.
Okay. Now, I guess also maybe a mention, I know that there was an issue last week whenever the time of the deposit, and that kind of creates a ripple effect. Whenever you make that deposit, that can delay whenever checks can be issued.
Correct.
And my understanding is it was a well-intentioned thing that you and your staff are wanting to try to get the payroll as correct as humanly possible, to make it as close to correct as 100% as possible, and had some discussions about maybe some additional time as far as when the deposit could be made.
Correct.
And my understanding, it was just a miscommunication. We're not laying any sort of blame upon any bank or anything like that. This is
That's
just
correct.
a miscommunication issue.
Yes.
At the end of the day, the ball's in our court. We're the ones that are responsible for making sure the payroll is correct and make sure the payroll is getting deposited correctly.
That's correct.
So that's, at the end of the day, that's our responsibility.
And if somebody, if we had been given a hard deadline of 3 o'clock, they would have gotten a file at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been as correct as it was 2 hours later or 4 hours later, but it would have gone out.
Right.
So there was just some miscommunication about when things could occur that night.
Sure. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions or discussion of, Mr. Providence, excuse me.
Well, I do want to mention that First Farmers has been over backwards to help us with this situation. So I believe there was some, I just want everybody to know that it was not a banking issue. It was a situation where it was purely a miscommunication on several different moving parts, with everything kind of culminating in that one time period that caused the issue that happened where those deposits did not happen on Thursday. So-
And the whole process was good intention to try to make it, the payroll, as correct as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And First Farmers is still working with us diligently to help facilitate that however we need them to work with us, so.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to open the floor for any questions or discussion by any committee members or anybody else. Mr. Atkinson.
I just got a couple questions. Of the 250 reports you got that you had problems with payroll, how far have you got worked through that issue? On how many have you got worked out?
I think we've started slicing and dicing that report. I think close to half of that were purely questions about the benefit amounts that we're hitting that were brand new. So that kind of cuts that report in half. I would say once you slice that in half, we're probably at least halfway through the remainder of those.
So approximately about 75 left of the payroll issue.
Right.
Okay. Also, the 1,500 payroll employees, how long will it take you to go through all 1,500 employees
We hope to have that done prior to January's payroll.
before January's payroll?
We hope
Okay.
to. We hope to, yes.
Okay.
And I guess I would reiterate, Mr. Palmer, you all are taking this Google Doc very seriously. When employees are reporting, you all are going through that list. And so would you, I guess, reiterate to any employees that if they still have remaining concerns or questions, or if they feel like there is an error, to report that so that you all can address that?
Absolutely, and that doc makes it much easier for us versus trying to field phone calls, because if we start trying to field phone calls, we can't answer the questions that they need answered on the fly. So it makes it much easier, much quicker for us to get back with them.
Right. And if it was just I guess 3 or 4 it would be great to be able to, but you got to have some order, or you can't get chaotic.
Absolutely.
You got to be able to have some logical process to be able to, where everybody's being treated fairly and
That's
equally, and you're
correct.
just, everybody kind of gets queued up and is going through the list.
That's right. And as they're going through that list, if they're taking 20 at a time, they are sending emails to those employees saying, we are now currently researching your issue that you've posted, so that they know that that's not going into that black hole. So we are reaching out to them once we start researching that issue.
Okay. Mr. Dudley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you said you hope to have gone over everybody's by the January payroll. What is January's payroll, the 15th?
The 15th, I think we'll actually I think the pay date is actually the 13th,
Okay.
so.
What about this year's W-2s? So we're saying there could still be inaccuracies on people's W-2s for this year, correct?
We hope to have all of W-2 information corrected. We actually have until January 31st to make corrections to W-2 wages for 2016. So that will be
Okay.
part of that whole process of going through everybody.
Okay. There's been some accusations that this all occurred because we do not have a current memorandum of understanding. Can you tell us if that's a true or a false statement?
I cannot. That's outside of my knowledge area.
Okay. I want to try and correct that. As a board member, I've never wanted us to slow down anything because of lack of a current memorandum. I think this board has always wanted our employees to be treated well and receive the compensation that they're due. I think the board as a whole has tried to increase benefits and look after employees as much as we can. I think it's sad that we have some employees that have that feeling. I think it's sad that we had some employees to say that they felt like there should be a walkout. This is a mistake that happened. I can tell you, every employer I've ever had, at some point or another, I've had mistakes made on my paycheck. I've always went to them in a timely fashion, and they were always corrected. You're not in this alone. I had some issues on getting my compensation check this year too, and it was finally handled, and I did finally get my compensation check. So some board members were affected. I know the superintendent's been affected. So nobody has picked and chosen anybody to try and hurt intention or anything else. It's just mistakes happened. I think we had some personnel that were not properly trained or did not take advantage of training. I think we maybe had a person in the supervisory position that just wasn't able to grasp it, the change of the system. But I don't think anything's been intentional. And this board, in my opinion, is diligently trying to correct the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Dudley. Mr. Beaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the questions I've been having this weekend is a lot of the teachers are saying that either their insurance is not being taken out or they're being charged with insurance that they hadn't had before. And so I just wondering if you have seen anything like that.
I think part of one piece of that is the insurance carries a different name on their pay stub now than what they're used to seeing, and that's caused a lot of questions. It's just called something different. There have been some one-offs on the insurance deductions, and I think a lot of that is just because of the open enrollment, everything mass changes going in at one time in the middle of everything else going on. So I don't believe it is a widespread issue at all.
So with the people that's got that concern, they have like oncurring expenses. So if they go to the doctor in the next week or two, they're not going to get, well, your insurance hasn't been paid, correct?
I can speak to part of that. They're looking, the way that the check stub looks on Skyward, not only do we report a deduction, so if you actually have family coverage and have a deduction, that is under a deduction section. But we also report what the county pays for your insurance. So if you have single coverage, it shows support insurance or insurance and an amount beside it, but that's not a deduction. It's not being deducted from their check. It's just part of ACA, and we report what the employer actually pays. That has been a majority of what they're getting confused. They think there's $252 coming out of their check, but it's not. Once we explain that to them, then they realize that's what we pay as the employer, not what they're paying as the employee.
Okay, all right. One other question. When you say all employees has gotten paid, and every employee's got paid 2 checks, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Does that include food services and bus drivers and all the support staff?
I believe food service is paid on a separate payroll than what we're dealing with, but yes, that includes bus drivers, support staff, everybody.
Okay, so all teachers, aides,
Yes.
all those have got paid 2 checks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what about food services? I mean, I know you said that that's a different.
That's
with
actually,
I guess that's for Dr. Marzak.
that's actually the group that's been helping us with this. They converted to this payroll system at the same time as the rest of the office did. They had a few issues the first couple of payrolls. They got them squared away, and they've not had an issue since. So it's a perfect example within our own building that the system works, if used correctly.
Yeah, but what I'm asking, have they got, everyone got paid?
My understanding is yes. I have nothing to do with that payroll. That's not under what we're working on here, but yes, they did get paid. Both
Okay,
checks.
thank you.
And I'll also note that I do think there is some confusion about the health insurance, because I actually had someone approach me and they had their pay stub, and then as we were kind of studying, and I think that was where we were kind of seeing some confusion, was it was listing how much you're having to pay for health insurance, but then there's another column that shows what the employer is also having to contribute, which is a pretty large sum too. And so I think that was causing some confusion. So some of this, it may be that maybe it's a good thing we're all studying our checks a little bit closer to kind of be aware of what exactly is going for health insurance, because it is a pretty expensive thing to be paying for. Ms. Parker. I thought your light was on. Yes, Ms. Kinzer. I didn't see the little.
But I can't turn it back on.
All right, Ms. Kinzer, and then Ms. Parker.
I have a couple of questions. I realize it's been reported about some had overdrafts and they were going to be handled. The banks what's come of that? Because other banks were involved.
That's correct. That's another reason, First Farmers has been with us through this. They immediately offered to cover. They already took care of all of their customers when they saw the overdraft. So First Farmers employees were covered. They have also said that they will cover any other overdrafts that anybody incurred from those payrolls being late. So all they asked for us to do is we're going to pay the employees back once the employees submit sufficient documentation, and then they will reimburse us for that.
Is that part of the Google Docs that they would submit that through that?
Yes, ma'am. They're going to let us know that, and then they're going to have to physically send us documentation, whether it be a copy of their bank statement or something from the bank that proves the overdraft fees.
Because I know I heard from one that had over $600 in overdrafts, and that would, be pretty bad time of year
Right.
to have, so it would take a while then with the other banks to
Right.
forgive
And as we
that or
get those,
whatever.
we're going to try to get those through as quickly as possible because of the time of year it is.
Okay.
And not only that, First Farmers also reached out to other banks such as Community First and a couple others.
Mr.
and
Hill.
And they agreed to waive the overdraft
Well,
fees
that's
as well.
that was my question. I would hope that they would do that. I didn't know whether it had been, or how that would be concluded. one other really, this is not monumental, Amanda, but I've had calls the last 3 months about people and their sick days. Now, are we also auditing that?
Right, we are keeping up with that in the separate system. It's called eSchool. It's where the employee would go in to put their absence in. Because of Skyward and then getting out of Skyward and going back to local government and then going back to Skyward, we have not got Skyward up to date for sick days, just simply because we wanted to make sure we were staying with Skyward, and we're going to audit that all at once. But there is a system called eSchool they can go into. If they see a problem, then
Okay.
they can call us and we'll get it fixed. But everything should be updated in that system.
Okay, good. And last question, Mr. Huebner asked a good question. Why did it take so long for us to realize we had this problem, that we got to this point? So I'd like somebody to answer that for him.
Mr. Parliament has let me as a superintendent be aware of things that he's discovered since he's been on the paycheck for the last 2 weeks, working through VACO. What I'm finding is not everything I was told as a superintendent was factual. Can't go back, can't fix things that happened in the past. But Mr. Parliament and I have discussed, we have a plan moving forward. We're going to be eliciting a little bit more help from VACO. They have Skyward, he was able to work with Skyward to get them to come in earlier to do some training with some newer employees. We have some positions available. Dr. Hargrove is going to be doing some interviews because she's taking the personnel side of financial operations while Mr. Parliament takes the operations side of financial operations. So we're going to be interviewing, we're going to be hiring, we're going to be training, and we have a plan moving forward that is going to create a sound financial operations center than we've seen in the system for a long time. This problem goes back before July 1st. It goes back before I was hired. We're creating a sound financial operations from here on out.
Oh, Ms. Parker, excuse me.
I turned it off. It sounds like a lot of the issues are just simple calculations that once you're able to, as far as this Google Doc, that you're able to kind of alleviate some of the concerns. Is there any way that we can prepare a simple memo or something that kind of explains some of these, frequently asked questions that you're getting? Or, something that just says, these are the things that a lot of people have seen, check to see if this affects you, or even just a simple walking somebody through their calculation. Because I know there are some teachers that they're not trained on Skyward either. They're not used to using Skyward. So for them to log on, they just want to know, how do I find out what the right amount is? And they kind of just want somebody to help them with that part of it. I don't know if there's an easy way for us to do that, but it seems like you're having to take up a lot of time. If we could figure out some way to make this a little bit less painful for everyone.
Right. We talked about that at the very beginning of starting to answer these Google Doc issues, and quite frankly, every calculation is a little bit different because it may deal with everybody's contract is different. It deals with start dates if you're not there the full year. There's just so many different wrinkles to it that we couldn't figure out a way to come up with something standardized. And I think with everything that's happened over the last 5 months, I think it's, if you want to call it a positive that we're reaching out individually instead of just sending them another piece of paper saying, here, try to figure this out. So we're trying to handle that on a one-to-one basis.
I appreciate what you're saying there. My only criticism of that would be, I think that on the 15th, it probably would have helped for somebody to be in the school with those teachers that weren't going to get their check, as opposed to just getting an email saying, fill out a Google Doc. The personalization, it sounds like we're being personal now, but the personalization to me wasn't there on the 15th, and that's when there was a lot of heartache. So I don't know. To me, it seemed like it should have been an all hands on deck. Is there a reason why we couldn't have just canceled that 15th payroll and just issue checks? I know it would have been time consuming. I know it would have, but I know that there have been times in the past when we've had issues with checks that we've just gone ahead and issued checks if there was a problem. Obviously, we have a lot of employees that we would be issuing checks to, but is there a reason that we couldn't do that?
We actually talked about that on Wednesday night when we found out that the file would not go. And the reason that we couldn't do it is because there was not check stock available. So we did not have that check stock. We were prepared to print 1,500 checks, stuff them, and courier them out Thursday morning to the individual employees.
So
So-
is that just an issue from the personnel going back? that
Yes.
They didn't
Yes.
make sure that there was,
I mean, you really should have, in extreme situations, enough check stock to be able to do this manually. That should be standard operating procedure.
were there any efforts made to reach out to the people that print our checks to see if they could have gotten us some overnight? I mean, I know we might have had to pay more, but
I mean, at that point, I mean, it was 5 o'clock on Wednesday night. I'm not sure that that was even an option at that point, so.
okay.
Mr. Atkinson?
I just kind of want to go back over towards the teacher side of it. The payroll stubs, has anyone went over the payroll stubs with each one of the teachers, explaining all the insurance issues, and is any of that happening?
As they're calling the office, we're doing that now. So as they call in, we're trying to tell them what the deductions are for, that sort of thing. So a lot of them already know, but a lot of them don't. So as they're calling, we're taking care of those employees.
So when we do the audit of the 1,500 personnel we pay, are you calling them, as you're doing the audit, are you calling each individual teacher and explaining to them then, or?
I think the only time we would reach out at that point is if we discover something that's wrong. It's just going to be really hard to reach out to 1,500 people individually and explain their deductions and checks.
We might ought to try to get together and with the teachers as a school, each school, individual school, and try to get the teachers together and explain, go over with them on the payroll, on the deductions and stuff. Because I'm sure a lot of them, you're going to have a whole lot more questions about it later on. If you can get the teachers together and just sit down with them and explain to them, this is what this means. Because I've looked at them, the Skyward program, payroll, I couldn't make heads or tails of it myself. And I'm sure David Bates looked at them too, and he had trouble with it too. But I think that'll be a pretty good way to go, is get with the teachers and explain to them.
We were at a basketball game and being handed check stubs, so.
And I'll add to that, we can probably do that from a deduction standpoint. It's much harder to explain somebody's gross wages to them when you have all kinds of different start dates and different calculations involved in that. So the deduction piece probably would be much more standard to say, this is what this means and this is what it represents, so.
Ms. Morency?
You mentioned that the amount of coming out of their checks for their insurance is changing.
Yes.
Are they aware of this?
Yes, all through open enrollment. Open enrollment was held in October, and I think Tanika sent out every other day emails about open enrollment, what the deductions were going to be, that sort of thing. So they were well aware that the changes were coming. It's just because the benefits don't actually start until January the 1st, even though we sent notice that their deductions would change the 15th, they still don't realize that it's going to change a month early as far as their premiums, what they pay. We actually deduct those premiums a month ahead of time. But because the insurance doesn't change till January 1st, they just didn't expect it. But there was plenty of notice sent. And as well as the state sends notice as well, because we're with the state insurance. So they also send notice to all employees.
Okay.
Just to follow up on a few comments, I do understand the need for personal touch. I also kind of, I guess, understand the balance where you've got so much on your plate right now, and there needs to be some sort of logical system to get through it. But I think, Mr. Superintendent, maybe you can touch on this, but after we've got everything straightened out and the dust is settled a little bit, so to speak, is there going to be some follow-up to employees, the ones that maybe they had problems, but maybe a follow-up to be a little bit more, personal touch that, hey, I know she had some issues, Is everything straightened out? Everything good now?
Yeah,
That sort of thing.
definitely. Yeah, one of the things that Mr. Parliament and I have discussed is, I don't know, I guess you could call it a goodwill mission as we start to go out and start to establish trust with employees to let them know, yes, your pay is correct and things are good. We're going to be out and about talking to employees personally and getting their feedback, listening. Yes, we know it was tough. We understand. Thank you for hanging with us. Thank you for sticking with us. Everything's good now. We're going to do that goodwill reach out. Because our employees, if they're going to focus on student learning by the end of the day, if they're going to focus on the 7 keys, then they got to know that what they're being paid is correct, so there are no doubts, there are no inconsistencies, and they can focus on educating children. So that's one of the things that we're going to work on from an operation side is establishing that trust.
Okay. Well, I would definitely encourage your office too to do some follow-up. I mean, I know that people are reporting things and may have some misunderstandings, but just a good customer service of after we believe we've solved the issue, just to maybe go through that list one more time and just, hey, did we get your problem fixed? You know, that sort of thing. So I think that personal touch, I would encourage that.
Yeah. And that was the need for the immediacy of bringing VACO on board. When our CFO abruptly left, I was on the phone with VACO 3 to 4 hours later. We needed an immediate solution from a company that was experienced in doing this if we were going to maintain operations moving forward and have everything squared. So just like you were concerned, I've been concerned for a while as well. And that led to the immediacy of the need. And with Amanda Hargrove working with Eric Parliament and working closely with the department and finding out what we found out and what we're remedying, VACO is doing a really good job. And that's why they became so highly recommended from a CPA here in Columbia.
Okay. Well, if I can just summarize just a few more things. I mean, as far as, Mr. Parliament, what you've going back and trying to figure out what the root of the problem is, you haven't uncovered anything that you believe is malicious or anything like that. This is just sometimes some things are over our heads a little bit and can kind of get compounded and kind of snowball pretty quick, I guess.
That's correct.
Am I accurate with that?
Yes, there's no evidence of any fraudulent, intentional behavior to do anything like that.
This is more of just things get over your head sometimes. So.
That's correct.
And then as far as the type of going back, of course, you all are focusing on this particular payroll period, but y'all are going to go back to the very beginning point and go forward kind of an audit type fashion to make sure everybody has got exactly what they were supposed to get. What you're seeing so far, help us just put that in context. Is it really smaller sums that we're talking about? We're not seeing any real large sums of, we're just talking a few dollars as far as what you're
I think
seeing right now?
generally, plus or minus, there are people that have been overpaid a little bit, and there are people that have been underpaid a little bit. I would say 95% of them are very small amounts.
Okay. And as far as through your analysis so far, and again, I want to be fair to you, you've only been on the job for 2 weeks, but you feel like you've got your arms wrapped around this as far as understanding what the root causes are and being able to fix that.
I believe so,
Okay.
yes.
And as far as doing this, fixing it going forward, you and your firm will be properly training employees, making sure that we got the placement of the correct employees in those positions. And well, I guess I just need to ask, will you all be doing that for us, helping us do that, to find
Yes.
the right employees and make sure they're trained correctly and have the right procedures in place?
That's right. We'll be helping find the right people, and then we want to hand this off to people that are trained and that can take it forward with the correct training.
And so it almost sounds like if we're building a house, it's like you're starting from the foundation, working all the way up from bottom up. You're going to
Right.
be making sure everything is correct.
And again, we got there very quickly.
Okay. And so it almost sounds like if there's any silver lining to all this, by the time you get done, we may have one of the best finance offices in the state, it
I
sounds
believe
like.
you will, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parliament.
Sure.
Is there nothing else from any committee members? Yes, Mr. Beaver.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, getting our employees paid and paid correctly, that's the most important thing. But, one of the things that I'm concerned about is our accounts payable, our purchase orders, and just our general ledger. Have you had a chance to look at any of that?
I have not. I have spent every waking moment of the last 2 weeks trying to get this immediate problem. And what I wanted to add, you know, it would be a little bit different situation if we were sitting in October, but because it was December 5th when we walked in the door, there was such an urgency from a time standpoint that no, I haven't had a chance to delve into those areas yet.
Do you plan to do that before you leave?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All
My
right.
scope will be the entire finance area, not just payroll.
Okay, all right. Thanks, sir.
All right. If there's nothing else from the committee members, is there a motion to adjourn? All right, motion by Mr. Dudley, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? This committee is adjourned.